I stood by my son's coffin, my hands trembling as the last handful of dirt slipped through my fingers. Beside me, whispers rose. "Where's his wife?" Each word cutting deeper than the cold October air. Hours later, while I drowned in silence and grief, I saw her face light up a screen, laughing with another man, glass raised high, celebrating freedom as if my son's death was nothing more than a ticket out. My name is Mason Turner, and that was the moment everything inside me broke. The air inside the chapel felt colder than the October sky outside, heavy with the weight of silence that no hymn or whispered prayer could ease. I stood near the front, my eyes fixed on the polished casket being lowered into the earth. Every creak of the ropes, every thud of shifting soil, echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. There weren't many people there. A handful of Ethan's co-workers, a few neighbors, an old friend or two who still kept in touch. I counted without meaning to. 39. 39 faces bowed in sympathy, but the one face that should have been there never appeared. I kept glancing toward the entrance, convincing myself that maybe a late flight or a traffic jam explained her absence. Yet, the doors remained still. The murmurs started low, a few words carried in hushed tones, but sharp enough to reach me. "Where is she? Isn't this her husband's funeral?" Each whisper lodged like a splinter under my skin. When the time came for the eulogy, there was no one else to step forward. My voice trembled as I spoke of Ethan's boyhood, of scraped knees on baseball fields, of the pride I felt watching him grow into a man who chased ambitions bigger than himself. I chose my words carefully, leaving out the darker truths, the nights he struggled under invisible burdens, the arguments that echoed through his home. As the service ended and the mourners filed past, offering hands I barely felt, I remained rooted in place. The sound of earth-striking wood followed me like a cruel refrain. I was left standing alone, staring at the grave that now held my son, the hollow inside me deeper than the pit in the ground. And through all the grief and disbelief, a single thought cut through like a blade. Where was Clara when I needed her most? The night after the funeral, I sat alone in the living room, the silence pressing down heavier than the whiskey bottle still sealed on the counter. That bottle had been meant for Ethan's last birthday, and now it stood like a cruel reminder of celebrations that would never come. My phone lay in front of me, its screen black, my call log littered with unanswered attempts. 10, maybe more, every one of them to Clara. Each time, her voicemail picked up with the same hollow cheerfulness that made my stomach twist. Out of desperation, I did something I'd never done before. I downloaded one of those social media apps and typed her name. Her profile popped up instantly, her face smiling back at me as if the world had never cracked in two. I scrolled with shaking fingers, searching for some clue, some sign of grief that matched my own. And then I found it. A photo, posted just hours earlier, Clara in a red dress, her smile wide, her hand raised in a toast. Beside her stood a young man in a tailored shirt, his arm draped around her waist like it belonged there. The caption burned into me. "Here's to freedom." My chest locked tight, air refusing to move. While I stood at Ethan's grave, shoveling earth over his coffin, the woman who had sworn to love him was celebrating her release. What twisted the knife even deeper were the comments. Her sister wrote beneath the photo, "So glad you finally moved on." Moved on. As if my son's life, and his death, had been nothing more than a shackle she'd finally shaken loose. I set the phone down, my hands trembling against the wood of the table. The grief inside me thickened, hardening into something colder, sharper. Clara hadn't just missed the funeral, she had betrayed the very idea of mourning. I sat frozen in my chair. The photo still seared into my vision when the phone buzzed against the table. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. A text message. I lifted the phone, and for a moment I thought my eyes were failing me. The words on the screen blurred, then sharpened again. "Dad, I'm alive. Come find me. Don't tell anyone." "Ethan." The phone slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears, the room spinning as if the ground had vanished beneath me. I had stood over Ethan's coffin, I had watched it lowered into the earth. Yet, here, in my hands, was his voice staring back at me in black and white. I snatched the phone up again, rereading the message once, twice, 3 times. It didn't disappear. It wasn't a trick of grief or a cruel mirage. It was there, real. Part of me wanted to believe it instantly. Another part recoiled, terrified that someone was playing the most vicious game imaginable. My throat tightened with both hope and dread, battling inside me until only instinct remained. I grabbed my keys, shoving them into my pocket with trembling hands. The house around me faded into darkness as I stepped out the door. My heart pounded against my ribs, carrying me into the night. If Ethan was truly alive, then everything I thought I had lost, everything I had just buried, was not what it seemed. I drove through wet streets, the message like a lead weight in my pocket. The address led me to a tired building on the edge of town, one of those places where the lights never feel warm. I knocked. The door opened to a kitchen lit by a single lamp. He was there, hunched over a cold cup of coffee, thinner than the last time I'd seen him alive. "God, you're—" I couldn't finish. He looked up. The hollows under his eyes made him look older by a decade. "I'm sorry. Dad, I had no choice." His voice was small but steady. He told me about Helixer, about falsified trial data and bodies left in the wake. He told me how he handed evidence to the FBI and suddenly found himself followed. When threats escalated, a friend at the hospital arranged papers, a staged death, and a brief burial to put distance between him and the men tailing him. If I hadn't disappeared, he said, they would have finished it. Relief and fury warred in my chest. "Do you know what I did today? I buried you." He flinched. "I know. I'm sorry. But I couldn't let them find you. Or me." He reached for my hand, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt a plan form between us. Back at his laptop, Ethan opened folders, receipts, messages, bank transfers. My stomach dropped. Miami hotel invoices, photos of Clara wrapped around a man named Victor, late-night texts with numbers I didn't recognize. One message read, "When can we pull the funds?" Another, "Once the claim clears, I'll handle it." Ethan's face darkened. She knew. I told her the plan. I asked her to act the grieving widow. Instead, she took the chance. He clicked a file showing small withdrawals from our joint account. Jewelry stores, luxury bookings, coded as surprises. Then a scanned contract, a private investigator's invoice and notes outlining how to portray him as mentally unstable if needed. If he'd remained public, she planned to steer the story towards suicide and keep the payout. I stood up so fast the chair scraped. "She would have killed him by law." Ethan nodded, eyes hard. "She already started. Now, we make sure she pays." After that night with Ethan, I stepped back into my role as though nothing had changed. To the world, I was still the grieving father, hollowed out by loss. Every Saturday morning, I carried flowers to the cemetery, arranging them carefully on the grave that held nothing but wood and air. Neighbors would stop beside me, whispering condolences, their voices dripping with sympathy. One leaned in gently, asking if Clara was coping at all. I swallowed hard, forcing tears to the surface, and only nodded. While I played the part in daylight, Ethan was locked away in a dim apartment across town under a false name, moving like a ghost through data trails. He compiled files for investigators, photos of Clara with Victor wrapped around her, suspicious wire transfers that bled money out of shared accounts, forged documents for inflated insurance claims. Piece by piece, he built a case strong enough to snap the trap shut. One afternoon, he sent me a message that turned my stomach. "Dad, she just wired 50 grand to Victor. They're spending like I'm already in the ground." I clenched my phone until my knuckles whitened. Later that evening, Clara's page lit up with new photos, her in sunglasses on a yacht, champagne flute in hand, comments praising her courage, her strength to move forward. I nearly crushed the phone in my fist. 3 days passed, and Ethan's next call carried a sharp edge. "The insurers froze her accounts. They're investigating fraud. It's starting." That same night, my phone rang over and over again. Clara's voice on voicemail was panicked, pleading. "Something's wrong with the bank. Mason, please, I need your help." I didn't answer. The net was finally tightening. A week later, I saw her again. Clara stood on the front steps of Ethan's house, her hair tangled, eyes rimmed red, a shadow of the woman who once smiled in family photos. A notice from the FBI flapped on the front door, and the lock had already been changed. She rushed toward me the moment I pulled up, desperation spilling from her words. "They say there's a problem with the insurance. I don't understand any of this. Please, Mason, you have to help me." I folded my arms, steady, deliberate. "And what about Miami? What about Victor?" Her lips parted, color draining from her face. In her panic, she blurted the one thing she shouldn't have. "How do you know about Miami?" The admission hung heavy between us, sealing her guilt. I pressed harder, my voice like ice. "The FBI has photos. Clara, you were laughing on a yacht while I stood at my son's grave. Don't bother pretending," she faltered, eyes darting wildly. "Victor was just a friend. I needed someone." I cut her off, pulling a copy of the forged insurance document Ethan had uncovered. "This isn't friendship. This is fraud, betrayal, and a death you scripted on paper. You weren't just unfaithful. You tried to erase him for money." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the steps, burying her face in her hands. I turned away, walking back toward my car. A cold fire burned through me as I gripped the wheel. The first act was over. The real war was only beginning. After that night outside Ethan's house, Clara vanished. For several days I neither saw her car on the street nor heard her voice on the phone. I assumed she was scrambling somewhere, trying to stitch together excuses or find another way to keep her scheme afloat. I almost convinced myself she'd slipped out of state, maybe out of the country. Then, late one evening, my phone lit up on the table. 12 missed calls from the same number. Her voice broke through in the first voicemail, ragged and frantic. "Mason, it's me. Please, I'm stuck in Miami. My cards aren't working. Every account is frozen. The hotel is threatening to call the police if I can't pay. Please, just once, help me. I'm begging you." I sat in silence, listening. The woman who had smiled on yachts and toasted to her so-called freedom was now cornered, her voice thin with panic. A new message rolled in before the last one ended, then another, each more desperate than the one before. Ethan called not long after. His voice was calm, clinical, like a surgeon explaining the cut of a blade. "Victor's gone. He pulled the last of the money and disappeared. She's got nothing left. No cash, no cards, no one to turn to." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, playing another message. This time Clara's sobs filled the line. "I know I did wrong, Mason. I know I failed Ethan, failed you, but please, please don't leave me like this. If you don't help me, I have no one else. They'll throw me out in the street." My throat tightened, but not with pity. Instead, images of that gray morning surged back. Me standing alone beside Ethan's grave, dirt striking wood, while whispers asked where his wife was. The hollow weight in my chest that day had nearly broken me. Now it returned, but colder, sharper, armored against her pleas. I shut my eyes and let the phone fall silent in my hand. Mercy had no place left inside me. She had chosen betrayal over loyalty, greed over love. She had left me to mourn alone while she laughed with another man. With a steady breath, I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. The begging, the tears, the apologies, none of it pierced me anymore. In that moment, all compassion was gone, replaced by a grim certainty. She was finally tasting the very poison she had poured into our lives, and this time, I would not be the one to save her. It was a gray Friday morning when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was steady, professional, but carried the weight of something final. "Mr. Turner, this is the Bureau. We've acted." They told me Clara had been tracked to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Miami. When the agent stormed in, she bolted for the back door, hair wild, suitcase half-zipped, but there was nowhere to run. They pinned her before she made it 10 feet. The woman who had once posed on yachts was dragged out in handcuffs, mascara streaking her face. By noon, the story had broken everywhere. Headlines scrolled across local stations, splashed in bold letters online. Widow who partied while husband dead, arrested in insurance fraud scheme. My phone buzzed with neighbors and old friends sending me links, their words thick with shock and disgust. Clara's name was no longer spoken with sympathy, but spat with contempt. That same day, Ethan's resurrection was carefully scripted. Under his new identity, Ryan Cole, the story was explained away as a medical catastrophe. The hospital released a statement admitting a rare diagnostic error, that Ethan had been in a prolonged coma, not dead at all. His old friend, the doctor who had covered for him, testified to the mix-up, papers signed, records adjusted, on the books. Ethan Turner became Ryan Cole, alive and legitimate. On the other side of the ledger, Clara was formally charged, insurance fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and collusion with Victor to siphon funds. The courtroom was packed for her first appearance. She was thinner, her hands trembling as she clutched the railing, the fire gone from her once sharp eyes. When the judge called her name, she turned, searching for me. Our gazes met for an instant. Her eyes were bloodshot, pleading, but I gave her nothing, not a nod, not a flinch. She had already taken enough from me. The prosecutor laid out the preliminary case, evidence stacked like bricks, each one heavier than the last. Clara's lawyer stammered through objections, but the facts were immovable: forged applications, money trails, photographs of her laughing in Miami as the coffin was lowered. The narrative was airtight. The gavel struck, cutting the air in two. The defendant will be held without bail pending trial, the judge declared. Clara sagged against her chair, her world collapsing in a single sentence. I walked out into the courthouse steps, the air crisp and damp, the sky painted in a pale wash of gray. For the first time in weeks, my lungs filled with something lighter than grief. The storm wasn't over, but a weight had shifted. The truth was finally in the open, and I could feel the beginning of release. 3 months later, life had found a rhythm I never imagined possible. Ethan, now Ryan Cole, stood beside me as we unlocked the door to a modest office in downtown Denver. The place was small, just 2 rooms and a conference table that smelled faintly of varnish, but sunlight poured through the windows, bright and unfiltered, like a blessing on something untainted. The sign gleamed proudly above the door, Cole and Turner Consulting. We had built it from the ground up, pouring our pain and hard-won lessons into a mission that felt almost sacred. Companies came to us for advice on fraud prevention, on guarding against the kinds of schemes that had nearly destroyed our lives. Ryan handled the clients with sharp precision, and I sat across the table as an advisor, grounding his strategies with the wisdom of scars no one could see. News filtered in from time to time. Clara had been sentenced, 12 years in federal prison. She had walked into the courtroom with her head bowed, lips pressed into a line, and left in chains. The headlines had long since stopped painting her as a grieving widow. Now she was branded for what she truly was, a con artist who betrayed her own family. Victor had vanished after draining what was left of her accounts, his trail thin and scattered. The FBI kept his name on their lists, but I knew men like him. Sooner or later, greed would bring him out of hiding. Prey always reveals itself, I muttered once, and Ryan nodded, a quiet fire in his eyes. One morning, as winter loosened its grip, we drove up into the foothills. Snow still clung stubbornly to the trees, but the sun was rising, melting patches into rivulets that ran silver down the slopes. We stood side by side, the wind cold but clean, and Ryan turned to me. "Dad, do you ever regret any of it?" I looked out at the horizon, the weight of the past months pressing and then lifting all at once. "No," I said. "Clara chose betrayal, but in the end, that betrayal gave us back each other. It gave us a second life, a chance to start again." I rested a hand on his shoulder, gripping it firmly as the sky broke into gold. We had walked through loss, deception, and fire, but we were still standing, together. And in that quiet moment, I knew. Out of the wreckage of grief, we had carved something rare, a new beginning born not from mercy, but from justice.